In the quiet town of Millfield, Ohio in 1851, death wasn't a distant concept. It lived next door, in the alley, in the river, and at the dinner table. And for Jeremiah Holbrook, an 11-year-old orphan boy, trauma didn't just knock at the door, it moved in and made itself comfortable. His father was crushed in a mill accident. His mother coughed herself into an early grave during the fever season. With no siblings, no extended family, and no home to call his own, Jeremiah should have faded into the background, another forgotten face in a forgotten town. But he didn't. Instead, he did something few would ever expect from a child. He faced his trauma head-on. While the rest of the town avoided the cemetery, Jeremiah walked straight into it, day after day. Where others saw a place of endings, he saw a field of stories still waiting to be told. He started recording every burial he witnessed, noting names, dates, and even tiny details like a scar on a soldier's cheek or a ribbon in a woman's hair. He wasn't running from death, he was trying to understand it. That's what trauma does. It forces us to confront what feels unfair, what feels unbearable, and what feels impossible to heal. But Jeremiah discovered something powerful at an early age. Trauma doesn't have to define you, it can refine you. Too often, we allow what happens to us to become our identity. I am broken. I am abandoned. I am worthless. Jeremiah had every right to carry those labels. He had every reason to become bitter, angry, and emotionally distant. But he made a different choice. He chose meaning over misery. He chose memory over numbness. He chose legacy over loneliness. And that's the essence of healing. Jeremiah didn't deny his pain. He worked through it. He let it shape his mission, not his self-worth. Instead of asking, "Why did this happen to me?" he asked, "What can I do because it happened to me?" Trauma often tells us that we're powerless. But Jeremiah proved that the opposite is true. Within the ashes of our worst days lies the fire to fuel our purpose. He couldn't bring back the people he'd lost, but he could make sure no one else was forgotten. So he wrote, he documented, he honored, and by doing so, he transformed his own suffering into a kind of sacred service. There's something timeless in Jeremiah's story. Today, trauma comes in many forms: divorce, abuse, neglect, poverty, bullying, addiction, loss. And yet the lesson remains the same. Your past may shape your perspective, but it does not have the right to define your identity or dictate your future. Trauma is like a shadow. It follows you, it darkens your steps. But just like shadows, it only exists when light is near, and Jeremiah was the proof of that light. He was the candle in the graveyard, the boy who wrote names so the world wouldn't forget them, the child who whispered prayers over bodies because no one else would. And through all this, he never asked for praise, attention, or compensation. He simply did what he felt was right, not because he wasn't hurting, but because he was. His actions were his answer to pain. That's what makes his story more than historical. It's personal, motivational, and universal, because if an 11-year-old boy in 1851 could take trauma and turn it into tribute, how much more can we do with the pain we carry today? You don't have to be perfect. You don't have to be healed to start helping others. You just have to be willing to step outside of your suffering and say, "This will not be the end of me. This will be the beginning of something greater." Jeremiah Holbrook's story is not about death. It's about life after pain. It's about purpose born from grief. And most of all, it's about refusing to be defined by what breaks you. In a world that often underestimates the quiet, the small, and the young, Jeremiah Holbrook proved something extraordinary. You don't need age, status, or strength to carry the weight of a broken world. Sometimes the hands that lift the heaviest burdens are the smallest ones. In 1851, the Ohio Valley was gripped by waves of suffering. Disease, hunger, poverty, and death. Adults were overwhelmed. Men drowned their fear in whiskey. Women wore grief like a second skin, and children, they were supposed to be spared from the worst of it. But Jeremiah didn't have that luxury. At just 11 years old, he had already buried both of his parents. He lived with a kind neighbor, but not even their warmth could erase the cold weight of loss in his heart. While other children played marbles in the dirt, Jeremiah walked to the graveyard, not out of morbid curiosity, but out of a quiet calling. It started with one burial, then another, then another. Soon Jeremiah became a familiar figure beside the caskets. Dressed in oversized boots and a hand-me-down coat, he would stand still, silent, watching and remembering. He wasn't a preacher, he wasn't a family member, he was just a boy with a notebook and a sense of responsibility far beyond his years. What made Jeremiah remarkable wasn't just that he showed up, but that he did what grown men refused to do. When the undertaker started missing days, when the records went unkept, when names were buried as fast as the bodies, they all failed to realize something. Jeremiah was watching. Jeremiah was writing. Jeremiah was remembering. One might ask, how can a child carry a town's burden? But here's the truth. Children have a unique power adults often forget. Clarity of purpose without the noise of pride. Jeremiah didn't do it for applause or reward. He didn't do it because someone told him to. He did it because he believed that every life deserved remembrance. Even when the world seemed to be collapsing, he showed up. He helped Mr. Gibbons, the local undertaker, wash the bodies, light the candles, lay the flowers. He didn't flinch at the smell of death. He didn't run from the sight of sorrow. He leaned into it, not out of darkness, but out of light. He brought compassion to a place many feared. He gave dignity to the forgotten. And slowly, people noticed. The townsfolk who once whispered behind his back began to nod when he passed. They began asking, "Did you write my mother's name in your book? Or did you say a prayer for my boy?" He had no official title, no certificate, and no salary, but Jeremiah became a servant to the soul of the town. The burden of memory, the weight of grief, the responsibility to care. He carried it all, and he did so with quiet grace. You see, leadership doesn't always come in the form of loud voices or grand gestures. Sometimes it's a child with a notebook, kneeling by a gravestone, whispering a prayer that no one hears. But God. In a time where people waited for someone qualified to step up, Jeremiah just stepped forward, not because he was ready, not because he was strong, but because he saw a need and believed someone had to meet it. That's what makes this lesson eternal. Today, too many wait for permission to lead. They wait to be older, wiser, richer, stronger. But leadership isn't about credentials. It's about conviction. And sometimes the purest, most powerful leadership comes from those the world overlooks. So when someone tells you you're too young, too small, too broken, too unimportant, remember Jeremiah, the boy who became the memory, keeper of his entire town, the child who carried a burden that grown men would not. The one who stepped into pain, not because he wanted to, but because someone had to. And by doing so, he taught us all something timeless. Never underestimate the heart of a child who chooses to care. In the end, the most powerful person in Millfield, Ohio, in 1851, was not the mayor, was not the preacher, was not the doctor. It was an 11-year-old boy with a broken heart, a burning soul, and a book full of names, each one remembered because he dared to care. In the cold, muddy corners of the Millfield graveyard, where the wind howled like sorrow itself and headstones leaned like weary souls, Jeremiah Holbrook knelt, not in fear but in quiet reverence. He was only 11, yet he was more familiar with death than most men twice his age. He had seen sickness rob neighbors of breath, seen fathers break under the weight of grief, and seen the hollow stares of mothers who buried their babies and forgot how to smile. Most would think that such a place, marked by constant loss, would harden a heart, that it would turn a child bitter, numb, or cold. But in Jeremiah's case, the opposite happened. Empathy bloomed where grief was thickest. He could have shut down. He could have buried his emotions alongside the bodies. But instead, he opened himself to pain, not only his own, but the pain of others. While grown men turned away, Jeremiah looked closer. While others quickened their steps past the dead, he stopped, watched, and listened. In the darkest of places, he chose to feel. What made Jeremiah unique wasn't simply his presence at every funeral. It was the way he connected with each life even after it ended. He didn't just record names and dates. He asked questions. What was her favorite hymn? Did he ever talk about his dreams? What made her laugh? These weren't details for a record. They were pieces of humanity, fragments of soul, and proof that each life mattered. He'd place wildflowers on unmarked graves. He'd wipe dirt from forgotten headstones. He'd hum lullabies he remembered his mother singing, just so no one would feel alone in their final rest. He became the town's silent mourner, grieving for those who had no one left to grieve for them. That's what true empathy looks like. Empathy is not simply feeling sorry. It's stepping into someone else's experience. It's standing barefoot in their storm and saying, "I can't fix it, but I will not let you suffer alone." And Jeremiah did this in a time when death was frequent and compassion was rare. Families were overwhelmed, resources were low, and people grew emotionally distant as a survival mechanism. But this boy, barely past childhood, carried something richer than gold, the willingness to feel deeply even when it hurt. The truth is, empathy rarely grows in comfort. It grows in the shadows. It grows in heartbreak. It grows in the cracks where light barely reaches. You learn empathy not when life is easy, but when you've tasted loss yourself, when your heart has been broken, and you refuse to let that pain make you cruel. Jeremiah's mother died in his arms. His father was crushed by machinery in a moment that left him paralyzed with shock. He could have become closed off, angry, or indifferent, but Jeremiah let his pain become a bridge, not a wall. Every body he counted, every grave he watched close, every tear he saw fall, he felt it all, and that feeling became fuel, fuel to serve, fuel to remember, fuel to make sure no one passed into silence without someone whispering their name. He didn't know he was becoming a healer. He didn't know he was planting seeds of change. He was just doing what he wished someone had done for his own parents: remember them, speak of them, care enough to carry their story forward. And that's the lesson for us today. We often run from dark places, from hospitals, funerals, pain, and tragedy. We assume we are not strong enough, not wise enough, not old enough to help. But empathy doesn't wait for permission. It doesn't ask for a perfect moment. It just shows up, with open hands, open eyes, and a heart that refuses to close. Jeremiah Holbrook was a child in a cemetery, but he was also a light in the darkness. A boy who proved that you can grow something beautiful even in a place of death, if you let love take root. So when life takes you through dark valleys, when you're surrounded by grief, when you feel the weight of sorrow pressing in, don't harden. Don't run, don't numb out, let yourself feel, because the very place that broke you might also become the place where you learn to carry others, and that is where empathy is born. Pain is one of life's most loyal companions. It visits uninvited, stays too long, and often leaves behind scars that never quite fade. For most, pain feels like an ending, an unwelcome thief that robs joy, safety, and meaning. But for a boy named Jeremiah Holbrook, pain became something else entirely. It became the beginning of something greater. At just 11 years old, Jeremiah had already experienced more loss than most adults. His mother's slow death from fever was not just a personal tragedy. It was a soul-shaping event. Her gentle hands, once so warm, became cold in his grasp. Not long after, his father, who worked the dangerous machinery at the mill, never came home. One moment of distraction, one loud snap of timber, and Jeremiah was alone in the world. Or so he thought. Grief has a strange way of isolating people. The town saw him as the orphan boy. A tragic figure with hollow eyes and no future. He was pitied but not understood, watched but not held. Talked about but never truly heard. Yet within that deep sorrow something stirred inside him. Not a scream, not a breakdown, but a quiet voice that whispered, "This pain has to mean something." Jeremiah didn't know what that meant at first. All he knew was that he couldn't bear to see another body lowered into the earth without someone truly seeing them. He remembered the cold, rushed burial of his mother, how no one lingered, how no one cried but him, how the wind carried her away like she had never lived. That memory didn't break him, it built something inside him, purpose. He began to attend every funeral he could. Whether he knew the person or not, he stood near the grave, notebook in hand. He asked questions. He sketched the layout of the cemetery. He wrote down not only names and dates, but also what he learned from the lives of the departed. Did they love? Did they serve? Did they smile often? What had their pain taught them? His notebook became more than paper. It became a ministry, a way to make sure that pain wasn't the final word for anyone. And through this painful journey, Jeremiah found something most people search their whole lives for: a reason to keep going. His pain didn't vanish, his grief didn't evaporate, but they were transformed. What once was a weight became a foundation, his sorrow became soil, and in it something purposeful began to grow. Pain has a unique power. It strips away the unnecessary, it humbles us, it reveals who we really are when everything else is taken away. And in Jeremiah's case, pain revealed a tender, resilient, courageous soul. One who could no longer protect himself from loss, but who could protect others from being forgotten. He didn't need recognition, he didn't chase applause. He simply wanted to give meaning to moments that felt meaningless. You see, purpose isn't always found in passion. It's often found in pain. Passion is loud and exciting. But pain is honest. It demands growth. It doesn't let you stay comfortable. It forces you to choose. Will you become bitter or will you become better? Jeremiah chose the latter, and the impact was undeniable. Years after his death, long after his tiny, fragile body was placed in the same cemetery he tended, historians discovered his collection of writings, a leather-bound book titled Ledger of the Lost. It contained over 300 names, each with a short reflection or lesson. Some pages were tear-stained, some were smeared with mud, but all were sacred. What started as a boy's way to cope with pain became a historical archive, a spiritual journal, and a monument of memory. His pain did not vanish, but it produced a legacy that lasted generations. That is the power of pain when harnessed with purpose. It becomes more than suffering, it becomes sacred, it becomes service. It becomes strength. So the next time you're tempted to ask, why am I going through this? Ask instead, what can this pain teach me? What can I build with these broken pieces? What if my deepest wound contains my greatest calling? Because sometimes the very thing that threatens to destroy you is the thing that will define your destiny. And just like Jeremiah, you may find that the burden you're carrying, though heavy, holds the blueprint for the work you were born to do. In the quiet corners of history, it is often not the loudest voices that echo across time, but the consistent, compassionate, and convicted ones. Jeremiah Holbrook was just a boy. No title, no position, no wealth. He wasn't a preacher, a politician, or a scholar. He had no pulpit to stand on, no crowd to address, no platform to amplify his thoughts. And yet, his small voice, just one boy's voice, became a lifeline to the forgotten, a lantern in the shadows, and a record that preserved the souls of a generation. In 1851, in the wake of disease, accidents, and despair, people were dying too fast to be remembered properly. Whole families perished within days, names were lost, lives blurred into silence, cemeteries filled, but history grew quiet, and that silence was deadly. Not just for the dead, but for the living. Because when we forget who came before us, we forget the warnings, the lessons, the strength, and the hope they carried. But Jeremiah refused to let that happen. He began writing names, not for records, but for remembrance. He didn't just jot down mother, age 42. He wrote Eliza M., who always gave bread to the hungry and sang even when the fever took her voice. He didn't write child, unknown. He wrote little Annie, who loved blue ribbons and used to bring apples to church. To anyone else, it might have seemed pointless. These were people no one would remember. No statues would be built in their name. No books would be published about them. But Jeremiah's heart told him a truth far deeper than the world around him understood. Every life matters. Every soul deserves to be remembered. And sometimes all it takes is one voice to make sure they're not forgotten. That voice, his voice, wasn't heard from a stage. It was scribbled in worn notebooks, etched into memory with trembling hands, ink-stained fingers, and candlelight. But it was powerful, and over time it began to echo. People started asking him, "Did you write about my husband? Will you remember my baby? Can you say something at the gravesite?" This small, quiet boy became the town's unofficial historian, eulogist, and guardian of memory. He didn't realize it then, but Jeremiah was building something eternal. He was creating a bridge between generations, preserving what could have easily been lost in the noise and numbness of tragedy. Decades after his death, his writings were found in a dusty church attic. Bound in twine, fragile and faded, they contained over 300 names, notes, thoughts, and reflections, each one a voice that would have been lost to time. Historians cried reading them, not because they were poetic masterpieces, but because they were real. Because in Jeremiah's words, the forgotten came alive again. His voice had preserved their dignity, their humanity, their very existence. That is the power of one voice. We often underestimate what we can do. We say, I'm just one person. We think we need a large audience, a perfect speech, or a global platform to make an impact. But Jeremiah reminds us, you don't need a microphone to change the world. You just need the courage to care and the will to speak. Your voice, spoken through kindness, written in journals, shared in quiet rooms, can echo beyond your lifetime. You don't have to shout, you just have to speak with purpose, because when truth is spoken in love, it travels farther than the loudest noise. Think about this, a boy who never lived past 13, a boy with no education beyond a dusty classroom, a boy with no family left to carry his name, preserved the stories of hundreds, and in doing so, he preserved his own. That's the legacy of a single voice. So when you doubt your value, when you feel unseen or unheard, remember Jeremiah, and know that one voice, your voice, can change hearts, preserve memories, shape futures, and awaken the past. History may be written by many, but it is often remembered because one person chose to speak when silence seemed easier. We often think of legacy as something reserved for the old, for those who have lived long lives, accomplished great things, earned titles, and made headlines. But legacy isn't measured in years lived, wealth accumulated, or praise received. It's measured by impact, by what remains in the hearts of others when we're no longer here. And in that regard, Jeremiah Holbrook, a boy who lived just 13 short years, left a legacy far greater than many who lived into old age. At a glance, Jeremiah's life might have seemed tragically small. He was an orphan, poor, quiet, overlooked, in the eyes of his 1,851 Ohio town. He was just another forgotten child, swallowed by sorrow. But what the town didn't realize at first, what they couldn't yet see, was that Jeremiah was doing something extraordinary every day. He was building a legacy, one act of remembrance at a time. While others walked away from death, Jeremiah walked toward it. While others rushed to bury and forget, he paused to record, reflect, and remember. He didn't own land, he didn't lead crowds, he didn't invent anything or fight in wars, but he preserved human dignity, and that is a form of greatness history often overlooks. Each name he wrote, each life he chronicled, each quiet prayer he whispered at gravesides, these were bricks in the foundation of a legacy that would outlive him by centuries. Jeremiah never asked, "What will people think of me when I'm gone?" He simply asked, "Who will remember them if I don't?" That single question, born out of pain and compassion, became the compass of his life, and through that compass he charted a path into the eternal. Legacy is not about how many people knew your name while you lived. It's about how many lives you touched, how many hearts you helped heal, how much light you left behind when your own light went out. Jeremiah's short life radiated in the darkest corners of his community, and long after his burial, his light still flickers in the pages of his handwritten journals. Decades after his death, when historians uncovered his notebook in the dusty attic of a forgotten church, they didn't just find ink on paper, they found a resurrection. Hundreds of names that had vanished from memory were brought back to life through the voice of a boy who refused to let death have the final word. That's the essence of legacy, what you do for others when no one is watching and when you have nothing left to gain. Jeremiah didn't leave behind children, he left behind remembrance. He didn't leave behind riches, he left behind reverence. He didn't leave behind a monument, he left behind a message. Your life matters even after it ends, and someone must care enough to prove it. We live in a time where people chase fame, followers, fortune, believing that if they just become known enough, their life will matter more. But Jeremiah's story shatters that illusion. He wasn't famous. He wasn't followed, he wasn't applauded, but he was faithful, faithful to his calling, faithful to his compassion, faithful to the idea that the most invisible lives deserve to be seen, and that's a legacy no fire can burn, no storm can erase, no century can forget. So what does this mean for us? It means you don't have to wait to be old to make a difference. You don't have to be powerful to be impactful. You don't have to be remembered by everyone to be remembered by someone. You just have to choose to live with intention, heart, and humility. Whether it's the kindness you show a stranger, the wisdom you pass to your children, the prayers you whisper over a hurting friend, or the quiet things you do that no one sees but God, these are the seeds of legacy. Jeremiah planted those seeds every day, and though his time on earth was short, his harvest still feeds the souls of those who hear his story. So remember this: legacy is not about how long you live, but what you leave behind. And what you leave behind, if sown with love, can outlive you for generations. Sometimes the smallest hands carry the heaviest legacies. You don't need to be powerful, wealthy, or old to make a difference. You just need empathy, courage, and a heart that refuses to forget others.